It was a time of great distress in Israel. For 7 long years, God's chosen people lived under the cruel oppression of the Midianites. In Judges 6:1-6, the Bible reveals the severity of the situation. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. Amid this desolate scene, we meet a young man named Gideon, son of Joash, from the tribe of Manasseh. Judges 6:11-12 introduces this unlikely hero. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." This scene is deeply significant. Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress, a place typically used for pressing grapes, not on a threshing floor, which was the proper place for such work. His unusual choice reflected the fear that gripped his life as he sought to hide from the Midianites. Yet it was in this moment of apparent weakness that God chose to meet him. In Judges 6:13-16, we witness a dialogue that would forever change Gideon's destiny. "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Gideon's response revealed his deep insecurity and skepticism. How could someone from an insignificant family in Manasseh be the deliverer of Israel? Yet God was not looking for someone qualified, but for someone willing. To confirm his calling, Gideon asked for a sign, as recorded in Judges 6:17-24. Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." What followed was an extraordinary demonstration of divine power. Gideon prepared a young goat and unleavened bread, placing them on a rock. The angel of the Lord touched the offering with his staff, and fire flared from the rock, consuming everything. This miraculous sign marked the beginning of Gideon's transformation from a fearful man to a mighty warrior of God. Judges 6:24 records, "So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, 'The Lord is Peace.' To this day it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites." Thus began the journey of the man God chose to deliver his people. A common man full of doubts and fears who would become one of the greatest judges Israel had ever known. The Lord not only saw beyond Gideon's apparent limitations, but used his weakness to display divine power in an even more extraordinary way. On that very night, after Gideon had built the altar to the Lord and received his calling, God presented him with his first challenge. The setting of this story reveals much about the spiritual condition of Israel at that time. In Judges 2:11-13, we find the historical context that led to the proliferation of Baal's altars. "Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals, and they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were all around them, and they bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. In Judges 6:25-26, the Lord gave Gideon a specific and bold command that would directly challenge this established idolatry. Now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, "Take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement, and take the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image which you shall cut down." The significance of this command was profound. The altar of Baal was not merely a religious structure, it was a center of pagan worship that had corrupted Israel. In Judges 2:20-22, God had already warned of the consequences of this idolatry. Then the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he said, "Because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and has not heeded my voice, I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, so that through them I may test Israel, whether they will keep the ways of the Lord, to walk in them as their fathers kept them, or not." The specific instruction to use the second bull of 7 years old also carried a special meaning. In Numbers 19.2, we see how sacrificial animals were chosen with purpose. "This is the ordinance of the law which the Lord has commanded, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, that they bring you a red heifer without blemish, in which there is no defect, and on which a yoke has never come." The chosen bull likely held significant value, possibly being used in Baal's own rituals. In Judges 6:27, we see Gideon's initial response. "So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants, and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night." This nocturnal action reveals the ongoing transformation within Gideon. Proverbs 29:25 offers a fitting reflection. "The fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord shall be safe." The community's reaction was immediate and violent, as recorded in Judges 6:28-30. "And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, there was the altar of Baal torn down, and the wooden image that was beside it was cut down, and the second bull was being offered on the altar which had been built. So they said to one another, 'Who has done this thing?' And when they had inquired and asked, they said, 'Gideon the son of Joash has done this thing.' Then the men of the city said to Joash, 'Bring out your son, that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the wooden image that was beside it.'" This violent reaction was not uncommon. In 1 Kings 18:40, we see how Baal worship was deeply entrenched in the culture. "And Elijah said to them, 'Seize the prophets of Baal, do not let one of them escape.' So they seized them. And Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and executed them there." Idolatry was a matter of life and death. The crucial moment came with Joash's surprising defense, recorded in Judges 6:31-32. "But Joash said to all who stood against him, 'Would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down.' Therefore on that day he called him Jerubbaal, saying, 'Let Baal plead against him, because he has torn down his altar.'" Joash's wisdom reflected a truth found in Isaiah 46:6-7. "They lavish gold out of the bag and weigh silver on the scales. They hire a goldsmith, and he makes it a god. They prostrate themselves. Yes, they worship. They bear it on the shoulder. They carry it and set it in its place, and it stands. From its place it shall not move. Though one cries out to it, yet it cannot answer nor save him out of his trouble." Gideon's new name, Jerubbaal, became a living testimony against idolatry. In 2 Kings 10:28, we see how this battle against Baal would continue in Israel's history. Thus, Jehu destroyed Baal from Israel. Gideon's act was one of the first steps in this long struggle for Israel's spiritual purity. In Judges 6:33-35, the narrative progresses. Then all the Midianites and Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. Then he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. As we see in 2 Chronicles 20:14, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jahaziel in the midst of the assembly. This manifestation of the Spirit marked Gideon's transition from an altar destroyer to a military leader. The man who had acted in darkness was now ready to lead in the light of day. With the altar of Baal destroyed and the threat of the Midianites looming, the situation demanded immediate action. Judges 6:33 sets the stage. Now all the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples joined forces and crossed over the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. God's response to this mobilization was swift, as recorded in Judges 6:34-35. Then the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, summoning the Abiezrites to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also into Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, so that they too went up to meet them. Even with the Spirit of the Lord upon him and an army gathering, Gideon needed additional confirmation. In Judges 6:36-37, we see his first request to the Lord. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." Gideon's request was specific and measurable. The threshing floor, a flat, open area used for processing wheat, was ideal for this test. The wool fleece would be left out overnight, exposed to dew like everything else in its surroundings. The outcome of this first test is described in Judges 6:38, and that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. The result was exactly as Gideon had requested. The fleece was drenched while the surrounding ground remained dry. It was a clear and undeniable sign. Yet aware of the enormity of the task ahead, Gideon humbly asked for further confirmation. In Judges 6:39, he made his second request with great deference. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew." This second request was even more extraordinary than the first. Naturally, wool absorbs moisture more readily than the ground around it. Yet now Gideon asked for the opposite, that the fleece remain dry, while the surrounding ground became wet with dew. God's response is recorded in Judges 6:40. That night God did so. Only the fleece was dry, all the ground was covered with dew. Through these two signs, God demonstrated his power in distinct ways, first by concentrating dew solely on the fleece, and then by excluding the fleece from the moisture that covered the rest of the ground. This was a clear display of the Lord's absolute control over the forces of nature, underscoring that he could act however and whenever he willed. In Judges 7:1, we see the immediate outcome of this confirmation. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley, near the hill of Moreh. The confidence Gideon gained through the signs with the fleece would prove crucial for what lay ahead. The army he had assembled was substantial, around 32,000 men, as the narrative later reveals. However, God had different plans to ensure the victory would be unmistakably attributed to him rather than Israel's military strength. The two tests with the fleece mark a pivotal moment in Gideon's transformation. The man who initially hid in a wine press to thresh wheat, who tore down Baal's altar under cover of darkness, was now ready to lead an army openly. The signs were not just confirmations of God's presence, but also a way to bolster Gideon's faith for the even greater challenges to come. This sequence of events reveals how patiently God worked with Gideon, understanding his doubts and fears and responding to his requests for assurance. The Lord did not rebuke him for seeking additional signs, but graciously provided the confirmations he needed. It was essential for Gideon to be fully convinced of divine support, as the commands he would receive next required extraordinary faith. The story of the fleece is not merely about miracles or supernatural signs. It is about a patient God working with a developing leader, preparing him for a mission that seemed impossible by human standards. With each step and each confirmation, Gideon was being prepared to rely more on God's power and less on his own strength or ability. With the camp established near the spring of Harod, God began unveiling his astonishing plan. In Judges 7:2, the Lord introduces a principle that would completely upend traditional military strategy. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me, saying, 'My own strength has saved me.'" The size of the original army is revealed in Judges 7:3, where we find the first instruction for reduction. "Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left while 10,000 remained. This initial reduction was rooted in a principle established in the law of Moses, as seen in Deuteronomy 28. "Then the officers shall add, 'Is anyone afraid or faint-hearted? Let him go home, so that his fellow soldiers will not become disheartened too.'" This first test revealed that more than 2/3 of the army were mentally unprepared for battle. Yet, even with this dramatic reduction, the Lord was not satisfied with the numbers. In Judges 7:4, the second phase of the reduction is introduced. "But the Lord said to Gideon, 'There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say, this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go.'" The water test is described in detail in Judges 7:5-6. "So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, 'Separate those who lap the water with their tongues, as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink.' 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink." The outcome of this second selection is recorded in Judges 7:7-8. "The Lord said to Gideon, 'With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home.' So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300, who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. Now the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. This reduction was drastic, from 32,000 to just 300 men, a decrease of over 99% of the original force. The reduction served several purposes. First, to ensure that Israel could not claim victory by its own strength. Second, to demonstrate that the victory would come solely from God's power. And third, to select the most vigilant and prepared soldiers for the task. The selection criteria, based on how the men drank water, held significant meaning. Those who knelt to drink were more vulnerable to a surprise attack, while those who lapped water from their hands kept their heads up, remaining alert to their surroundings. This test revealed not just courage, but also prudence and readiness for combat. In Judges 7:9-11, God continues to strengthen Gideon's confidence. "During the night the Lord said to Gideon, 'Get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands.' If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp." So he and Purah his servant went down to the outposts of the camp. This invitation to spy on the enemy camp illustrates how God understood Gideon's heart and his need for further reassurance. The Lord not only reduced the army to a humanly impossible number, but also provided another confirmation of the victory to come. The reduction of Gideon's army is one of the Bible's most dramatic examples of how God often works in ways that defy human logic. By conventional military standards, reducing an already outnumbered force would be disastrous. However, this was exactly the situation God wanted, a scenario where the victory could only be attributed to his divine intervention. The 300 men who remained were not chosen for their exceptional physical strength or advanced combat skills, but for their attentiveness and readiness, demonstrated in a simple test of how they drank water. This shows that God often values qualities different from those humans consider important. With just 300 chosen men, God led Gideon to witness a further confirmation of victory firsthand. In Judges 7:12, the magnitude of the challenge they faced is described. "Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seaside for multitude." In Judges 7:13-14, we read the account of Gideon's nighttime reconnaissance. "When Gideon came, behold, there was a man telling a dream to his fellow, and he said, 'Behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian and came to a tent and struck it so that it fell, and overturned it so that the tent lay flat.' And his fellow answered, 'This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has delivered Midian and all the camp into his hand.'" The interpretation of this dream is especially significant when considering the humility of the barley loaf, a simple and common food, overturning an entire tent. In Judges 7:15, we see Gideon's immediate response to this revelation. "And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, that he worshipped and returned to the camp of Israel and said, 'Arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hands.'" The battle strategy that followed was as unconventional as the selection of the warriors. In Judges 7:16, we see the initial preparations. "And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers." The specific instructions are detailed in Judges 7:17-18. "And he said to them, 'Look at me and do likewise. Behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that, as I do, so shall you do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then you also blow your trumpets on every side of the camp and shout, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." The plan was extraordinary in its simplicity. Each man would carry a trumpet in one hand and a pitcher with a torch inside in the other. In Judges 7:19-20, the execution of this unique strategy is described. "So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just set the watch. And they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew their trumpets and broke their pitchers, and held the torches in their left hands, and the trumpets in their right hands to blow with. And they cried, 'The sword of the Lord and of Gideon.'" The coordination of this attack was crucial. In Judges 7:21, we see the positioning of the warriors, "And they stood every man in his place around the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled." The effect of this strategy on the Midianite camp is described in Judges 7:22. "And when the 300 blew their trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the camp. And the host fled to Beth-shittah in Zererah, and to the border of Abel-Meholah by Tabbath. The sudden noise of the 300 trumpets, the sound of breaking pitchers, the sudden blaze of torches piercing the darkness, and the unified battle cry created utter chaos within the enemy camp. The result was that the Midianites, in their confusion and panic, turned on one another. The mobilization of reinforcements is described in Judges 7:23. And the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites. To ensure that the Midianites could not escape, Gideon took additional measures, as seen in Judges 7:24-25, and Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize the waters as far as Beth-barah and also the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they took the waters as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. And they captured 2 princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. Then they pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. This strategy of war demonstrated several key principles. First, strength does not lie in numbers, but in obedience to divine plans. Second, the chosen weapons, pitchers, torches, and trumpets, were ordinary items transformed into tools of warfare by divine strategy. Third, the perfect timing and coordination of the 300 men highlighted how unity and discipline are vital even for seemingly simple plans. The victory was so decisive that it led not only to the Midianite army's flight, but also to the capture and execution of their princes. The locations where Oreb and Zeb were killed, the rock of Oreb and the winepress of Zeb, became permanent memorials of this extraordinary triumph. With the death of the princes Oreb and Zeb, an intriguing dialogue began with the men of Ephraim. In Judges 8:1 we find their complaint. Now the Ephraimites asked Gideon, "Why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian?" And they challenged him vigorously. Gideon's response demonstrates his diplomatic wisdom, as seen in Judges 8:2-3. But he answered them, "What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer? God gave Oreb and Zeb, the Midianite leaders, into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you?" At this, their resentment against him subsided. The pursuit of the Midianites was still intense. In Judges 8:4, we see the condition of Gideon's 300 men. Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. When he reached Succoth, Gideon sought support, as recorded in Judges 8:5. He said to the men of Succoth, "Give my troops some bread, they are worn out, and I am still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." The response from the leaders of Succoth was defiant, as seen in Judges 8:6. But the officials of Succoth said, "Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your troops?" Gideon replied with a promise of retribution in Judges 8:7. Then Gideon replied, "Just for that, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars." A similar situation occurred in Peniel, as reported in Judges 8:8-9. From there he went up to Peniel and made the same request of them, but they answered as the men of Succoth had. So he said to the men of Peniel, "When I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower." The narrative then reveals the size of the remaining Midianite army in Judges 8:10. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with a force of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the eastern peoples. 120,000 swordsmen had fallen. Gideon's final strategy is described in Judges 8:11-12. Gideon went up by the route of the nomads, east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and attacked the unsuspecting army. Zebah and Zalmunna, the 2 kings of Midian, fled. But he pursued them and captured them, routing their entire army. After the victory, Gideon fulfilled his promise to Succoth, as seen in Judges 8:13-16. Gideon, son of Joash, then returned from the battle by the pass of Heres. He caught a young man of Succoth and questioned him, and the young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 officials of Succoth, the elders of the town. Then Gideon came and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me by saying, 'Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your exhausted men?'" He took the elders of the town and taught the men of Succoth a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. The punishment for Peniel was also carried out, as recorded in Judges 8:17. He also pulled down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the town. The final confrontation with Zebah and Zalmunna reveals a personal dimension to the battle. In Judges 8:18-19 we read, "Then he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, 'What kind of men did you kill at Tabor?' 'Men like you,' they answered, 'each one with the bearing of a prince.' Gideon replied, 'Those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you.'" The execution of the kings is described in Judges 8:20-21. Turning to Jether, his oldest son, he said, "Kill them." But Jether did not draw his sword, because he was only a boy and was afraid. Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Come, do it yourself. As is the man, so is his strength." So Gideon stepped forward and killed them and took the ornaments off their camels' necks. This episode marks the definitive end of Midianite oppression over Israel, a victory so complete that it is mentioned in Psalm 83:11. "Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna." Gideon's great victory was not merely military, but served as a lasting testament to God's power to deliver his people through unlikely means. After the great victory over the Midianites, the Israelites made a surprising proposal to Gideon. In Judges 8:22 we read, "Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, 'Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian.'" Gideon's response reveals his understanding of the true role of leadership in Israel. Judges 8:23 records, "But Gideon said to them, 'I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you.'" However, Gideon made a request to the people, as documented in Judges 8:24-26. And Gideon said to them, "Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil." For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, "We will willingly give them." And they spread a cloak, and every man threw in the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were around the necks of their camels. With this gold, Gideon made a decision that would have lasting consequences, as recorded in Judges 8:27. And Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city, in Ophrah. And all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. Despite this mistake, the impact of the victory over the Midianites was significant, as recorded in Judges 8:28. So Midian was subdued before the people of Israel, and they raised their heads no more, and the land had rest 40 years in the days of Gideon. Gideon's personal life is described in Judges 8:29-31. Jerubbaal the son of Joash went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. And his concubine who was in Shechem also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. The end of Gideon's life is recorded in Judges 8:32. And Gideon the son of Joash died in a good old age, and was buried in the tomb of Joash his father, at Ophrah of the Abiezrites. The consequences of Gideon's death are described in Judges 8:33-35. As soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal Berith their god. And the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of all their enemies on every side. And they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. Gideon's legacy continued through his son Abimelech, but in a tragic manner. Judges 9:1-6 unfolds this story. Now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and said to them, and to the whole clan of his mother's family, "Say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you. Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh." And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our brother." And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal Berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows, who followed him. And he went to his father's house at Ophrah, and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. This family tragedy demonstrates how even great leaders can leave complex legacies. The ephod Gideon made became an object of idolatry. His many wives led to family conflicts, and his son Abimelech brought destruction upon his own family. Nevertheless, Gideon's positive impact on Israel's history cannot be denied. In Hebrews 11:32-34, he is remembered among the heroes of faith. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. The story of Gideon is one of the most inspiring accounts in the Bible, showcasing how God can transform a fearful man into a powerful leader. From the winepress where he hid to the battlefield where he led 300 men to an impossible victory, Gideon teaches us that God does not call the equipped, but equips the called. If this extraordinary story has touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that God can achieve the impossible through ordinary people. Click the share button and help others discover this incredible story. Subscribe to our channel for more biblical content like this. Activate the notification bell to stay updated on our upcoming videos, where we will continue exploring the fascinating stories of God's Word. Leave a comment. Which part of Gideon's story touched your heart the most? Share your reflection with us. See you in the next video, and remember, just like Gideon, you too can be used by God in ways you never imagined.